Hello. So, as announced, my name is Netta Marshall, and I'm a San Francisco-based UI and visual designer. And over my career, I've worked for a number of companies ranging from huge corporations to tiny startups. Last year, I led design at a San Francisco-based nonprofit called Watsi, and I'm currently on the product design team at Palantir. So I've always been interested in helping people. When I was a kid, my parents would make sure that I always had some sort of general awareness that there were people in the world who needed help in one way or another. We would visit food banks or annually clear out our closets to donate things to charities. And the private school that I went to did a lot of the same via outreach programs, and we would do things like host bake sales with the proceeds going to the less fortunate. But as a busy adult, this desire to do good stuck with me, but I unfortunately never really made much time for it. I remember taking my very first international trip. I was going to Belize for about a week. And before leaving, people wished me well. They told me to be careful because I was traveling alone. And a couple of people mentioned to me that rum was cheaper than water, which I did not believe for a second. I mean, how could that even be possible? But I got there, and I found it to be true. Water was about double the price as a bottle of rum, and I was completely taken aback. I mean, I wanted to help this issue, but I had no idea what I could do to really directly impact the situation. So, like most of us, I swiftly got caught up in the whirlwind that is life, and that issue fell by the wayside. In the spring of 2011, I landed a job at Square. And as part of the onboarding process at the time, Jack Dorsey would come around and take $1 from every new hire, and he would use your signature screen in an intro in a weekly meeting called Town Square. Now, unbeknownst to me, I was employee number 100. So during my intro, Jack joked that he was coming back for his remaining $99. I blew it off. I told him that, I had no idea where the money was even going and he would never get it. A few weeks later in Town Square, Jack showed a video from Charity Water, which is where all of the new hire funds actually go to. And that video outlined that there's 700 million people in the world without access to clean water. To put that into perspective, that's about 10% of the world's population. And that video swiftly reminded me of my trip to Belize, and I was so moved that I actually cried a little bit into my beer at that Town Square. And once the meeting was over, I ran over to Jack and I donated my remaining $99 with a $50 tip. Moving on from Square, I worked at RDO for about a year and then freelanced for a few months after that, and I was suddenly exposed to this magical land that is San Francisco and Silicon Valley. There's so many tech companies building a vast array of products. For instance, with the help of an app, I can have someone come to my house and install a new shelving system in my closet, or I can have all of my groceries delivered to my door, or with the press of a button on my phone, I can have a driver pick me up from my house and take me pretty much anywhere I'd like to go. If I want someone to come to my house, pick up and launder all of my dirty clothes and bring them back to my house neatly folded in a box, I can have that. In many ways, it's a place where new ideas to cater to the privileged are bred. But what about those who need a little help? Design really has the biggest impact for potential, but so much of the world's design power goes to non-impactful and often unimportant products. So it was at this period of my career that I decided to dedicate my time to something that was bigger than myself, for real this time. So I wrote my friend Gary Tan an email. He's a partner at Y Combinator, and I said, hey, I'm looking for a job. My only requirements were that the team were super small, that they were building something really important, and if it was a nonprofit, that would be like icing on the cake. So he introduced me to Chase Adam, who had the original idea for Watsi. We met that next morning for breakfast. I met the rest of the team that afternoon, and I was hired that night. I think Chase's question to me was, so do you want to come with us to Nepal in 3 weeks or what? And no nonprofit, to my knowledge, moves that quick. And I had a really good feeling about what was ahead. So I started at Watsi about a few weeks later, and I spent some time getting my feet wet, getting to know the brand, the product, the voice, the donor base, the priorities. And at the beginning of my 3rd week, I was on a plane to Nepal with the team. We were visiting our very first medical partner, Possible Health, and they're located in a far western district of Nepal called Acham. Now, getting there wasn't exactly easy. After flying into Kathmandu, we took an additional short flight into a town about an hour away. And following that was an 11-hour Jeep ride through windy, bumpy, often unpaved mountainous roads. Now keep in mind, we were in big, comfy Jeeps with seat belts and plenty of room for us to fall asleep if we wanted to, but if you were a little kid with a broken leg, you would be taking those very same roads on a packed bus. And that was really our first dose of perspective. So we arrived at Biopata Hospital, where Possible Health operates, and we got a tour of the grounds, and we were really eager to see things in action. So the 6 of us piled into this tiny little patient interview room. We were sitting on floor cushions along the wall. And we met Hari, who had one of the most incredible stories I had heard in a long time. He was a 15-year-old boy who was forced to leave his family due to economic constraints. He used to live with his parents and siblings. He had to drop out of school and move away from home and seek work as a construction laborer. He had been living with ear infections for a really long time, but the pain had worsened and started to become constant. His hearing was impaired and he started having fevers, but the cost of treatment was more than he would earn in years. He had been brought into the hospital by someone he worked for, and just in time. Doctors said that if he had waited any longer, left the infection untreated, it would have rendered him deaf. And he was so relieved to know that he could have treatment for something that he had been living with for so long at absolutely no cost to him. My colleague at the time, Thomas, was sitting on the floor next to me, and he turned to his left and he asked, "Have you ever done user testing like this before?" And I whispered no while I stifled tears. And it was that moment that I realized the opportunity I had been granted. My vehemence for creating quality designs really grew. I wanted even more to make Watsi the best crowdfunding platform out there. So when we got back to the States, I started working on our redesign. And that redesign was about a year in the making, end to end. We scoped it out to be a one-to-one redesign, no new features. We knew that we needed a better foundation for us to build the products and features that we thought were valuable to our donor base. We wanted to make the site more image-driven, so we increased the size of all of our patient photos, and we introduced a series of heroes on a few pages to create a bit of visual appeal. Now, this went as far as our 404 and 500 pages, which can sometimes be forgotten about. We even used a series of photos gathered on one of our trips to East Africa to better tell the story of how Watsi works. Now, presenting a compelling and emotional narrative appealing to everyone can be challenging, but also very rewarding. We put a lot of time, effort, thought, and care into what our brand represents, how to showcase it visually, and what our voice was. At Watsi, we had put design first, and we strived to have everything that we produced be beautiful to the world. We wanted it to be memorable, from our marketing imagery to our copy to our site interactions. And really, not enough nonprofits do that. In fact, very few think that design is a worthwhile investment. We wanted our donors, both existing and potential, to feel a sense of happiness and motivation when they visited the site, like they were part of a solution, part of a movement. Now, if you've ever been awake in the late night hours and you've been watching television, you've probably seen commercials from nonprofits who will portray the problem that needs solving versus the outcome that is possible. They often ask people to prevent something terrible from happening versus being a part of making something incredible happen. And that's the reason that you see so many bright, smiling faces on Watsi, why the stories are so rich, lively, and relatable. So I was actually born with a fairly common condition. I had a herniated navel. Now, when some babies are born, they have belly buttons that protrude, and that usually will correct itself within the first couple of years of life and have little to no effect on the child. But mine didn't, and my doctor became concerned with it for whatever reason and suggested that I had corrective surgery at the age of 1. So whenever I see kids with the same condition on Watsi, it hits me a little harder than most, and I'm more inclined to donate to them. And the same with atrial septal defect. My kid sister was born with this, and it's basically a hole between the two upper chambers of your heart. Sometimes it'll close during pregnancy or shortly after birth, but hers didn't. So some of her blood would pump from her heart to her lungs in a loop instead of oxygen-rich blood flowing into the rest of her body. She too had surgery at the age of 1, so whenever I see patients on Watsi, I connect and I donate. But it's not just the conditions that I connect with, it's sometimes just wanting to help a kid grow up happy and healthy, fulfill his or her dreams, or just to give sight back to a grandparent. I've been a designer since the age of 18, and over that time, I've worked on some incredible products with incredible people, but I had never had this type of fulfillment before. I had got a constant sense of perspective. I remember once I was having a bad day. It was pouring, raining. I couldn't get a ride home. There were no Lyfts or Ubers available or whatever. The buses were packed and slow by the time they actually arrived, so I decided to walk. So I finally get home, and I was tired and I was hungry, but I had no food, so I was stuck eating ramen. And as I ate, I decided to hop on Watsi, and I was reading through some of the profiles, and I found a 7-year-old girl named Nolari. She had just been fully funded, and her story really stood out to me. She was badly burned in a house fire that killed both of her parents and her 5 siblings. She was the only survivor. She had scar tissue that rendered her left arm pretty much unusable. She had no mobility. But you know what? She was still smiling in her photo. And at that moment, I realized, I don't really have it so bad. Things could be so much worse for me. My life is actually pretty good. Now, I try to be cognizant about complaining about first world problems, but I think that increased so much more when I started working at Watsi. And during a trip to Tanzania, we got a chance to meet Nolari, and she was still that happy little girl that we saw in photos. And of course, I was really moved and had to sneak off because I was crying into my camera. On a separate trip to Cambodia, we visited a partner who runs an on-site eye clinic. Now, they mostly treat patients who are elderly and have cataracts, and they're having their sight restored. All the procedures are super low cost. They're about $100. Now, for comparison, that same procedure would cost about $6,500 in the United States. And the patients are all so happy. They're able to see for the first time in years. He's my favorite. But that's not the extent of the impact. When you donate, you're not just helping this one person. You might also be helping their family members get back to school because they no longer have to help grandpa get around town. Or you might be helping their entire village because they now have a farmer back. Your contribution goes so much farther than this one person, and it was an honor of mine to really be part of a movement to provide a basic human right to people. So after spending about 15 months at Watsi, this urge to really help the world become a better version of itself grew overwhelmingly large. I had finally scratched this nearly lifelong itch, but it wasn't really enough. I wanted to make a bigger impact on the world outside of the healthcare space. Now, I remember being reached out to by probably the nicest recruiter I've ever encountered. So I sent her back a quick note a couple months later, and I asked if they were still interested in chatting, and they were, which made me happy. And I ended up joining the team at Palantir, and I was so excited to dive in. Now, most people don't really think about enterprise having the potential for impact, but Palantir as an organization and its employees have a mission of making the world a better place by really empowering organizations to make sense of their data to solve the most pressing problems. You would be surprised at the effect proper access to information and data can have. Palantir works on a number of really incredible projects, but I think those that hit me the hardest are the ones that come out of our philanthropy team, and I want to talk about just a few. The average family size in Syria is 6.5 people. And every minute of every day, one family is forced to flee their homes due to ongoing conflict. And thus far, about 3 million Syrians have left the country to seek refuge elsewhere, mostly in Jordan. But there are still 6.5 million people displaced within Syria, totaling over a third of the country's population. Power structures are constantly in flux, so it's pretty difficult to safely deliver aid to civilians. But with Palantir, organizations can share data with partners, and that allows them to negotiate safe passage for convoys and better understand how the conflict might affect future needs. There are a number of criminal organizations trafficking ivory and threatening to put Africa's elephants into extinction. Now, not only are these people responsible for the slaughter of hundreds of thousands of elephants, but they're also linked to regional conflict, political corruption, and organized crime. Palantir is able to provide a platform for organizations to allow them to investigate and combat illegal killing of elephants and worldwide trafficking of ivory and other illicit goods. In fact, last year in 2014, East African authorities were able to identify a suspicious shipment, and that led to the seizure of $11 million in illicitly traded environmental goods. And that was one of the largest environmental crime seizures in African history. There are an estimated 50,000 veterans homeless each night in the United States. That's enough to put Yankee Stadium over maximum capacity. Because of inefficient housing matching process that involves multiple government agencies and nonprofits, these veterans will often remain homeless for up to 300 days, almost a full year. Palantir has partnered with an organization to develop HomeLink, which is a web application that really streamlines the house matching process within one single scalable platform. This year, we aim to reduce that housing matching process to 60 days and expand to chronically homeless populations and introduce HomeLink to additional cities across the United States. And it's not just the philanthropic projects that are profound. We've helped the CDC perform traceback analysis on outbreaks of illnesses and infections like E. coli and cholera. And we've helped analyze the Haiti earthquake situation to assist aid workers on the ground. Now, speaking of disaster response, we've also aided workers after Typhoon Haiyan and Hurricane Sandy. Former President Clinton even gave us a shout out 1 year after Sandy.
After Hurricane Sandy last year, Chelsea led our foundation's efforts to get on the ground in Rockaways and help with the cleanup. 1,000 people volunteered to spend a day working with Team Rubicon. Team Rubicon started working with this one group from Silicon Valley, a software company called Palantir Technologies to get volunteers where they were needed most. When those young men from Palantir showed me their technology, I wanted them to join our foundation and the CGI network to really transform the way we prepare for and then respond to disasters and other emergency situations.
Designers have far more power than they realize. David Berman says, the same design that fuels mass overconsumption also holds the power to repair the world. And just to go on a brief tangent here, I noticed that designers will sometimes pour loads of time and loads of energy into an unsolicited redesign of something where they had no idea the brief, the constraints, how it fits into an existing framework, or if it can even be implemented. Now, if that same time and energy were spent for something good, we might be able to break this vicious cycle that is designers not supporting impactful projects and impactful organizations feeling as though design is a luxury. So here's the question. If design and marketing can make people crave sugar water or urge them to buy something that they probably don't need, or persuade them to switch from one brand to another, just imagine what it could do for something that's legitimately life-changing, world-changing. Normally, when people talk about things being world-changing, it tends to sound a little bit grand, and I don't mean in one fell swoop it can make all that is wrong right. What I mean is it can solve problems on a case-by-case basis around the world, and with that, it changes the reality for people in that situation. That's the reason that I value design so much. What I hope to leave behind with our generation is that giving and helping others can be cool, and designing for impact doesn't need to be boring. Cheers.